He looked like any other drifter crossing the wasteland, torn hat, dusty boots, leading a limping horse. But in 12 hours, 500 warriors would kneel in his path, all because of what he was about to give away. Clay Hawthorne pulled his hat lower against the merciless sun. His stomach had stopped growling 2 days ago, replaced by a hollow ache that made each step deliberate. The horse beside him, a gray mare named Dust, favored her left front leg, another reminder that this journey had pushed them both past their limits. He reached into his worn saddlebag and felt the familiar weight of his last possession of any real value. A single piece of bread, wrapped in cloth. Hard as leather now, but still food, still life. The path ahead stretched endlessly through red dirt and scattered rocks. No town for another day's ride. Maybe 2. No water since yesterday morning. Clay ran his tongue across cracked lips and calculated survival in his head. The bread might give him strength to reach the next settlement. Might. But as he crested a small rise, movement caught his eye. 20 yards off the trail, huddled against a boulder, sat a small figure. Dark hair, torn clothing that might have been buckskin once. A child, no more than 8 or 9 years old. Clay's hand instinctively moved to the pistol at his hip, then stopped. The child wasn't moving, wasn't even looking up, just sitting there, arms wrapped around drawn knees, rocking slightly. He'd seen enough death in his 35 years to recognize it approaching. The smart thing would be to keep walking. This was contested territory. Taking sides, showing mercy. Those were luxuries for men with full bellies and safe destinations. But something in the child's stillness made Clay's feet stop moving. He studied the small figure again. Native, by the look of the clothing. Probably lost. Maybe abandoned. Definitely starving. Clay's fingers found the bread in his saddlebag. His last bread. His survival. The child looked up then, and Clay saw eyes that held no fear of him, only the quiet acceptance of someone who'd already made peace with dying. And in that moment, Clay Hawthorne made a choice that would echo across the mountains in ways he could never imagine, because sometimes the smallest acts create the loudest thunder. But he had no idea that hidden eyes were already watching from the cliffs above. Clay approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravelly earth. The child, a girl he could see now, didn't move, didn't run, didn't even seem to care that a stranger was closing the distance between them. Up close, the situation was worse than he'd thought. Her lips were white and cracked. Her small hands trembled despite the heat. This wasn't just hunger. This was the edge of death. "Easy there," Clay said quietly, crouching down to her level. The girl's dark eyes met his. No words passed between them, but Clay understood. He'd worn that same expression in the war, the look of someone who'd stopped fighting and started waiting. He pulled the bread from his saddlebag, unwrapped it carefully. The crust was hard enough to break teeth, but it was food. Real food. The girl's eyes followed his movements, but she made no move to reach for it. Pride, maybe, or fear, or maybe she was too weak to try. Clay broke off a piece and held it out. "Go on." She took it with shaking fingers, bit into it with the desperate care of someone who hadn't eaten in days. The sound of her chewing was the only noise in the vast emptiness around them. While she ate, Clay studied the landscape. No camp nearby. No signs of where she'd come from, or where she might belong. Just endless red dirt and distant mountains that shimmered in the heat. He broke off another piece of bread, then another. Each piece he gave away was a day off his own life. But watching her eat was worth the trade. "What's your name?" he asked. She finished chewing, swallowed hard. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Ayanna. That's a pretty name. I'm Clay." She nodded and took another small bite, making the bread last. Smart girl. She understood survival. But as Clay watched her eat, a new worry crept into his mind. Getting her fed was only the first problem. Out here, alone, she wouldn't last another day, even with food in her belly. And he was barely equipped to save himself, let alone a child. The smart thing would be to give her the rest of the bread and keep moving, let her fate unfold without getting tangled up in it. But looking at Ayanna, seeing her clutch that bread like it was made of gold, Clay realized he'd already made his choice back when he stopped walking. He gave her the last piece of bread and watched her wrap it carefully in the cloth, saving it for later. The gesture hit him harder than expected, hope planning for tomorrow. "Where's your family, Ayanna?" Her eyes grew distant. "Gone." One word that explained everything and nothing. Out here, gone could mean dead, could mean lost, could mean worse. Clay stood up, his knees protesting. Dust was watching them both, her ears pricked forward with animal curiosity. "Well," Clay said, more to himself than to her, "can't leave you here." But as he helped Ayanna to her feet, he had no idea that his act of kindness had been witnessed by more than just the desert wind. High in the rocky cliffs above, shapes moved in the shadows, silent watchers who had seen everything, and they were already moving. Clay lifted Ayanna onto Dust's back, the mare snorting softly but accepting the extra weight. The girl weighed almost nothing, another reminder of how close to death she'd been. "We'll find you somewhere safe," Clay said, though he had no idea where that might be. The nearest town was still a day's hard ride, and that was assuming Dust's leg held up. As they started walking, Ayanna spoke again. "You should not have stopped." Clay glanced up at her. "Why's that?" "My people. They watch. Always watch." Her small hands gripped the saddle horn. "White men who help. It confuses them." Something cold settled in Clay's stomach. "Your people are watching us now?" Ayanna's dark eyes scanned the cliffs around them. "They see everything in these mountains." Clay tried to keep his voice casual. "And what do they usually do when they see white men?" "Depends." Ayanna shifted in the saddle. "Most white men take. You gave." The implications hit Clay like a physical blow. He'd walked into territory where his kind were killed on sight, and now he was traveling with living proof that he'd been here. But turning back wasn't an option. Ayanna wouldn't survive another night alone. They walked in silence for an hour, the sun beating down mercilessly. Clay's throat felt like sandpaper, but he pushed forward. Every step took them closer to... what? Safety seemed like a fantasy now. "Clay." Ayanna's voice was barely audible. "Yeah? They're following us." Clay's blood turned to ice. He didn't turn around, didn't change his pace, but every nerve in his body went on high alert. "How many?" "I cannot tell, but..." She paused. "My grandfather taught me to count horses by the sound of their hooves. Many horses." Clay's mind raced. If they were being tracked by a war party, running was pointless. Dust was already lame, and carrying double would slow them to a crawl. Fighting was equally hopeless. His revolver held 6 shots, and that assumed he lived long enough to use them all. "Ayanna," he said carefully, "what did your grandfather tell you about white men?" "That most have hearts made of stone." She was quiet for a moment. "But some have hearts that remember what it means to be human. And how can your people tell the difference?" Before she could answer, the sound reached them, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Many of them, moving fast and getting closer. Clay stopped walking. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, offering no cover, no escape. He helped Ayanna down from the horse and checked his weapon. 6 bullets against what sounded like an army. "What happens now?" he asked. Ayanna looked toward the sound of approaching horses, her expression unreadable. "Now we find out if giving away your last bread was the smartest thing you ever did, or the last thing you'll ever do." The hoofbeats grew louder. Dust's ears twitched nervously, and Clay Hawthorne stood in the middle of nowhere, protecting a child with nothing but an empty stomach and a decision he couldn't take back. In the distance, dust clouds rose against the sky like smoke signals announcing his fate. The riders appeared over the ridge like shadows given form, 20 warriors on painted horses, moving with the fluid precision of men born in the saddle. Clay's hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't draw. Not yet. The lead rider was older, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. Silver streaked his black hair, and his eyes held the weight of someone who'd seen too many battles. He raised his hand, and the entire party stopped 50 yards away. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched tight as a bowstring. Then Ayanna stepped forward. She spoke in her native tongue, her voice clear and strong despite her small size. Clay couldn't understand the words, but he caught the rhythm of explanation, of storytelling. She gestured toward him, toward the empty cloth that had held the bread, toward herself. The old warrior listened without expression. When she finished, he studied Clay with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You are the one who gave away his last food," the warrior said in heavily accented English. Clay nodded. "Yes." "Why?" It was a simple question that demanded a complex answer. Clay thought about lying, about claiming noble motives or strategic thinking, but something in the warrior's gaze demanded truth. "Because she was dying, and I couldn't live with watching it happen." The warrior was quiet for a long time. Behind him, the other riders sat motionless, weapons ready, but not aimed. waiting for their leader's word. "I am Dakota," the old warrior finally said. "Ayanna is my granddaughter." Clay's world shifted. The child he'd found wasn't just any lost soul. She was family to a war chief. The implications crashed over him like a flood. "She was taken 3 days ago by rival clan," Dakota continued. "We tracked the raiders to this place. Found only blood and torn clothing. We thought," his voice caught slightly, "we thought she was dead." Ayanna moved to stand beside her grandfather's horse, and Clay saw the family resemblance in their identical dark eyes. "But she lives," Dakota said, his gaze returning to Clay. "Because you chose her life over your own comfort." Clay shifted uncomfortably. "I just did what seemed right." "Right." Dakota seemed to taste the word. Many white men speak of right. Few act on it when it costs them something. If you were Clay, what would you do? Accept whatever judgment was coming and hope for mercy, or try to negotiate safe passage for doing a good deed? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose. Because what Dakota said next would determine whether Clay lived to see another sunset. "You have given me back my heart," the old chief said slowly. "My granddaughter is the last of my bloodline. When we lost her," he shook his head. "A grandfather's grief makes poor decisions." Clay waited, hardly breathing. "But now she returns to us, fed by your sacrifice." Dakota's expression was unreadable. "This creates debt." "No debt necessary," Clay said quickly. "I'm just glad she's safe." Dakota smiled for the first time, an expression that transformed his entire face. "White man who refuses payment for saving a chief's granddaughter. You are either very wise or very foolish." "Probably foolish," Clay admitted. "Good. Wisdom can be taught. Character cannot." Dakota raised his hand again, and Clay tensed, expecting the worst. But instead of weapons, the warriors behind Dakota began to dismount. "You will come with us," Dakota said. "Tonight you will be our guest. Tomorrow," he paused, and something mysterious flickered in his eyes. "Tomorrow, you will understand what your kindness has purchased." Clay had no choice but to trust that his compassion had bought him time. But as they rode toward the mountain camp, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was riding toward something far bigger than simple gratitude. The camp nestled in a hidden valley between towering red cliffs, invisible from the desert floor. Clay counted at least 200 people, warriors, women, children, elders, all moving with the quiet efficiency of a people who'd learned to survive in harsh country. They stared as he rode in, not with hostility, but with curiosity. Word of his deed had already spread. Dakota led him to the center of camp, where a large fire pit waited surrounded by smooth stones. The chief dismounted and gestured for Clay to do the same. "Sit," Dakota said. "Eat. Rest." Within minutes, Clay found himself overwhelmed by hospitality. Women brought bowls of stew that smelled like heaven after days of hunger. Children offered him water from decorated gourds. Men nodded respectfully as they passed. "This is more kindness than I deserve," Clay said. Dakota settled beside him on a woven blanket. "You showed mercy to a child who was not your blood, in a place where mercy could have cost your life. This deserves recognition." As Clay ate, Ayanna sat nearby, already looking healthier. She spoke rapidly to other children in their language. Gesturing excitedly, Clay caught his name mentioned several times. "What's she telling them?" "The story of the cowboy who gave away his tomorrow for a stranger's today." Dakota's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Already it grows in the telling. By winter you will have fought off wolves barehanded." Despite everything, Clay smiled. "Stories have a way of getting bigger. Stories are how we remember what matters." Dakota grew serious. "My people have many stories about white men. Most are dark, but tonight we add a different kind of story." An elder approached, a woman with silver hair braided with feathers and beads. She spoke to Dakota in rapid, urgent tones. Clay caught the respect in her voice, but also something else. Concern. Dakota listened, then nodded slowly. The woman melted back into the crowd. "Is everything all right?" Clay asked. "Moondancer brings news. Other tribes have heard about Ayanna's rescue, about the white man who sacrificed for native child." Dakota's expression grew thoughtful. "Word travels fast in the mountains. Is that a problem?" "Perhaps. Perhaps opportunity." Dakota stood. "Come. There is something you must see." He led Clay to the edge of camp, where the ground dropped away into another valley. Below them, scattered across the landscape, were the flickering lights of more camps. Dozens of them. "All those people." 7 tribes, Dakota confirmed. "Traditional enemies, many of them. But tonight they gather for same reason. Clay's stomach dropped. To discuss what to do with me? To discuss what your actions mean. Dakota placed a weathered hand on Clay's shoulder. For generations our peoples have warred. We have good reasons for distrust. But you, he paused, you have created something new. A crack in the wall between our worlds. The weight of implications settled on Clay like a physical burden. I just helped a hungry child. Yes, and sometimes the smallest pebble starts the greatest avalanche. Below them, drums began to beat in the scattered camps. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, creating a rhythm that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the earth itself. What happens tomorrow? Clay asked. Dakota's smile was enigmatic. Tomorrow you will stand before 500 warriors from 7 tribes, and they will decide if your deed was an act of one man's conscience, or a sign that peace between our peoples is possible. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. The drums grew louder, and Clay realized he wasn't just a man who'd shared his bread anymore. He'd become a symbol, whether he wanted to be or not. Clay barely slept. The drums continued through the night, their rhythm weaving through his dreams like a heartbeat made of sound. When dawn finally broke over the canyon rim, painting the red rocks gold, he found Dakota already awake, sitting by the dying fire. Nervous? The chief asked. Terrified, Clay admitted. Dakota chuckled. Good. Fear keeps a man honest. He stood, brushing dust from his buckskins. Time to prepare. Women from the camp approached with clothing, clean buckskins decorated with intricate beadwork. Clay looked questioningly at Dakota. You cannot stand before the council looking like a desert rat, Dakota explained. Honor demands proper presentation. As Clay changed clothes, he watched the valley below transform. The scattered camps were moving, converging toward a flat area between the cliffs. Hundreds of people flowed like water toward a common destination. Have gatherings like this happened before? Clay asked. Once, when I was young, to discuss war with the cavalry. Dakota's expression darkened. Many died afterward. Today, he shrugged. Today we discuss the possibility of something different. They descended into the valley as the sun climbed higher. The assembled crowd was larger than Clay had imagined. Warriors from 7 tribes, each group distinct in their dress and markings, but all united in their focus on him. A circle had been formed with the leaders seated on blankets in the center. Clay recognized the hierarchy immediately. These were chiefs, war leaders, men whose words carried the weight of life and death. Dakota guided him to the center of the circle. The crowd fell silent. Brothers, Dakota began, his voice carrying across the gathering. 3 days ago we lost more than my granddaughter. We lost hope that kindness could exist between our peoples. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, others skeptical. But this man, Dakota gestured to Clay, proved that courage comes in many forms. He could have passed by. He could have taken what little she carried. Instead, he gave away his own survival for a child he did not know. An older chief with scars across his chest stood. Pretty words, Dakota, but one man's kindness does not erase generations of broken promises. Agreement rumbled from several sections of the crowd. True, Dakota acknowledged, but if we judge all white men by the actions of the worst, do we not become like those who judge all natives by the actions of raiders? The scarred chief considered this. What do you propose? A test, Dakota said simply. If this man's heart is truly different, let him prove it. Clay's pulse quickened. What kind of test? You will walk among us for 1 full day, Dakota explained. No weapons, no protection except our word. You will see how we live, share our food, hear our stories. And at sunset, he paused dramatically. You will choose. Choose what? Whether to return to your people with knowledge of our camps, our numbers, our weaknesses, or, Dakota's eyes gleamed, whether to carry a different message, one of possibility. The scarred chief leaned forward. And if he chooses wrongly, then nothing changes. The walls between us remain. Dakota met Clay's gaze. But if he chooses wisely, perhaps we begin building bridges instead of graves. Clay looked around the circle at hundreds of faces, some hopeful, some hostile, all waiting for his answer. He thought of Ayanna, now sitting safely with other children. He thought of his empty saddlebags, his uncertain future. I accept, he said. A new kind of murmur swept the crowd. Surprise, approval, concern all mixed together. But as the chiefs nodded their agreement to the test, Clay caught sight of movement on the canyon rim above. Riders, White men, armed and watching. His blood turned cold as he realized the truth. Word of this gathering had spread beyond the tribes, and some people would kill to prevent what was happening here from succeeding. The test was about to become far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Clay spent the morning moving through the camp like a ghost walking between worlds. Children who should have feared him brought him toys carved from wood. Elders shared stories of hunts and battles, their weathered hands painting pictures in the air. Women offered him food prepared with care usually reserved for family. But the riders on the ridge haunted his thoughts. "Dakota," he said quietly when they were alone. "We have a problem." The chief followed Clay's gaze to the canyon rim. His expression hardened. "How many?" "At least a dozen. Armed. Watching. Soldiers? Maybe. Could be civilians. Either way, they're not here for a friendly conversation." Dakota was quiet for a long moment. "This is what we feared. Peace talks make some people nervous. What do we do?" "Nothing for now. But we prepare." Dakota gestured subtly, and Clay saw warriors beginning to drift toward the edges of camp. Not obvious, but ready. The day continued despite the threat above. Clay witnessed the daily life of people he'd been taught to consider enemies. He saw mothers teaching daughters to weave. He watched boys learning to shoot bows with the patience of their fathers. He shared meals with families who treated him like a welcome guest. As afternoon approached, the scarred chief, Red Bear, sought him out. "You see how we live," Red Bear said. "Not as savages, as people." "I see that," Clay admitted. "Yet your people come to our valley armed, watching, waiting." Red Bear's scarred face was grim. "This does not surprise us. It disappoints but does not surprise. Not all white men think the same way." "No? Then prove it." Red Bear pointed toward the canyon rim. "Those men up there, they will not let this gathering end peacefully. They cannot afford to let word spread that natives and whites can coexist." Clay felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. "What are you asking me to do? When the time comes, and it will come soon, choose a side, not between red and white, but between fear and hope." As if summoned by Red Bear's words, shouts erupted from the canyon rim. The riders were moving, no longer content to simply watch. Dakota appeared at Clay's side. "It begins. How many are coming down?" "Too many." Dakota's jaw was set. "But we are not defenseless." Warriors emerged from concealment throughout the camp. More than Clay had realized were present. But they were protecting families, children, elders. Fighting would mean casualties among innocents. "There has to be another way," Clay said. "What do you suggest?" Clay looked at the approaching riders, then at the families around him. Ayanna sat with other children, her dark eyes wide with fear but not panic. She trusted the adults to handle this. "Let me talk to them," Clay said. Red Bear laughed bitterly. "Talk? They come with guns, not words." "Maybe, but I'm still white in their eyes. That might buy us something." Dakota studied him carefully. "And if they do not listen? Then we find out if your warriors are as good as their reputation." The sound of hoofbeats grew closer. In minutes, the riders would reach the valley floor, and any chance for peaceful resolution would die in gunfire. "This is madness," Red Bear muttered. "Maybe," Clay agreed. "But sometimes madness is the only sane response to an insane situation." He started walking toward the sound of approaching horses, leaving safety behind for the second time in 2 days. But this time, he wasn't just risking his own life. He was risking the lives of everyone in the valley. The riders thundered into the valley like a storm made of dust and fury. 15 men, heavily armed, faces set for violence. Their leader, a thick-set man with dead eyes, reined his horse hard when he saw Clay walking toward them. "Well, well," the man called out. "If it isn't the famous Indian lover himself." Clay stopped 20 feet away, hands visible and empty. "Captain Morrison, so you do remember me?" Morrison's smile was cold. "Last time we met, you were leaving the army under unfortunate circumstances. Different war, different choices," Clay said evenly. "Same yellow streak?" "Looks like." Morrison gestured toward the camp behind Clay. "Consorting with the enemy now?" "I don't see any enemies here. Just families." Morrison laughed harshly. "Families that have been raiding settlements for months. Families that need to be taught a lesson. These people haven't raided anyone. This is a peaceful gathering." "Peaceful?" Morrison pointed to the warriors positioned around the camp. "Looks like they're ready for war to me. Only because you brought one to their doorstep." The standoff stretched taut. Behind Morrison, his men fingered their weapons. Behind Clay, he could feel the camp holding its breath. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison said. "You're going to walk away from this mess. Forget you were ever here. And maybe, we'll let you ride out alive. And the people in the camp? That's not your concern anymore." Clay felt the moment crystallize around him. Everything he'd learned about these people in the past day, Ayanna's trust, Dakota's wisdom, Red Bear's challenge to choose between fear and hope. "I can't do that." Morrison's face darkened. "Then you're a fool." "Probably, but I've been called worse." Morrison raised his hand, and Clay tensed for the order that would turn the valley into a battlefield. But before Morrison could speak, another sound filled the air. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Clay turned to see warriors emerging from hidden positions throughout the canyon, not just from the camp, but from the cliffs, the side canyons, the rocky outcroppings that dotted the landscape. Dozens of them, then hundreds, 500 warriors, just as Dakota had promised. All moving in complete silence, surrounding Morrison's small force like shadows given form. Morrison's men shifted nervously, suddenly aware they were vastly outnumbered. "Impressive," Morrison said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "But we have better weapons." "Do you?" Dakota's voice carried across the valley as he rode forward. "Look again." Morrison looked, and his face went pale. Every native warrior carried a rifle. New ones. Well-maintained ones. "Trade," Dakota explained simply. "We are not as isolated as you believe." The math was simple and deadly. 15 men against 500, in terrain the natives knew intimately. Morrison's bravado crumbled like sand. "What do you want?" Morrison asked through gritted teeth. "What we have always wanted," Dakota replied. "To be left in peace." Red Bear rode up beside Dakota. "This man," he gestured to Clay, "has shown us that peace is possible. Today, you will show us whether your people are capable of the same wisdom." Morrison looked at Clay with pure hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Clay said quietly. "It ends here, today. You ride away, spread the word that these people want peace, or you stay and explain to your superiors how you started a war you couldn't win." For a moment, that felt like an eternity. Morrison weighed his options. Then, slowly, he raised his hand in a different gesture. "Retreat. Move out," he called to his men. As the riders disappeared back up the canyon trail, the assembled warriors began to fade back into the landscape as silently as they'd appeared. Within minutes, the valley looked peaceful again. "You chose well," Dakota said to Clay. "So did you." "This is just the beginning," Red Bear added. "There will be others like Morrison. Maybe. But there will also be others like Clay." Dakota smiled. "And perhaps in time, there will be more bridge builders than wall builders." If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. As sunset painted the canyon walls gold and red, Clay realized his test was complete. He'd walked between worlds and found his place, not as white or native, but as something new. A bridge between peoples who'd forgotten they shared the same sky. Ayanna ran up to him, her small face bright with joy. "You stayed. I stayed," Clay confirmed. And in that simple exchange, the future began to change. Clay never returned to his old life. He became a translator, a mediator, helping other tribes and settlers find common ground instead of battlefields. Ayanna grew up bilingual in both language and culture, eventually becoming a teacher who helped other children navigate between worlds. Dakota lived to see the peace he'd dreamed of take root, watching his granddaughter marry and raise children who knew no difference between red and white, only between right and wrong. And in the desert where a hungry cowboy once shared his last bread, a trading post grew into a town where all people were welcome. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo across generations, reminding us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. "Here, take my last piece of bread." Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a heart so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video now.